of the title. However, it is an important video. It is an important part of our history as a nation. And you go, well, how could Hitler ever possibly be a part of the history of our nation? Well, for starters, most of Hitler and Himmler and Sauckel's ideas came from the United States. Parts of his speeches were originally written by a man named Henry Ford, the famous automobile tycoon, gambling man, oddly enough. So, Adolf Hitler is nowhere near a hero of mine. He's not somebody that I look up to. He's also not somebody I envy. When it comes to being heard, though, he knew how to get heard. That he knew how to do. There are some things that Hitler said that were later restated by none other than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Well, how can Adolf Hitler and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. both say the same thing? And, of course, do we condemn Martin Luther King Jr. because some of the things that he said just so happened to be things that Adolf Hitler said? No, it was an understanding of human nature. Oh, yeah. But that's not what we're looking at now. What we're looking at now is war crimes. 1938, we had some pretty abhorrent things that the British did to their own people and several of their colonies, including India, where mass graves. I don't know how to explain to you how much they push the mass grave thing today. Mass graves in Kosovo, mass graves in eastern Kiev, mass graves in, well, just about any of our enemies must have mass graves, right? Makes for great propaganda whether it's true or not. Now, the Marquis de Lafayette, the sole reason that we have a nation today, the Marquis de Lafayette, absolutely. They had a French Revolution because France bankrupted itself fighting the Revolutionary War for us worldwide. The American Revolution, no matter how you guys want to look at it, no matter how you want to cut it, the French and their colonies made that the First World War. Oh, yes. And it bankrupted the French and the French monarchy. And then, of course, Marie Antoinette, whether or not she actually said what we claim that she said, let's eat cake. Well, it doesn't matter. That was their excuse, and she's dead, and she can't defend herself. But that was one of the things that the Nazis were able to use in their propaganda that we overlook today. We overlook certain parts of the propaganda machine because they don't fit our version of history or the version of history that we want the public to know about. Were there mass graves in India? Absolutely. What about the situation with the Boer Wars? Were there mass graves there? Absolutely. The British, they made a lot of mass graves. And after World War II, a lot of people's argument was, well, what about what the British did in their colonies? What about the French did in their colonies, both in the 1930s? I mean, the structure of brutality in Vietnam, of course, anybody who's going to go in there and run out the French, the people there are going to go, oh my God, wow, what a change, what a difference. We got a lot of battles being fought today that were started by our grandparents. Can we honestly say that? No. Warfare goes all the way back to the history of humanity and prior. Animals battle each other for territory all the time. But as humans, we're supposed to have sophisticated brains. We're supposed to be able to reason our way out of animal instincts. Like the instinct to breed, to reproduce. I've been pretty successful at that, but that's only because it's a traumatic thing for me. Now, many of the things that Adolf Hitler and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had to say about humanity and human nature and what we should be striving for, both men are right. Both of them went about it differently, and only one of them was marginally successful. And unfortunately, in the world, Adolf Hitler was the one who was nearly marginally successful. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't accomplish shit in his lifetime. He's my favorite hero of the 20th century because of the model that he presented as a human being. Not because he was fucking successful in any way, shape, or form. He was a complete and total fucking failure. Malcolm X, on the other hand, was not a failure. The Black Panther Party was not a failure. What's the difference between the two, and why do I like the one that's the failure more than the ones that won? Marching into the California Senate, armed. That changed everything. What do we call that? We call that the Second Amendment. It was being used in that instance, literally, for what the Second Amendment was written for. So we got a bunch of black men and women in prison still today for doing that. They didn't kill anybody, didn't shoot anybody. While the police were waging all-out war on them. Any excuse that they could use, an unpaid parking ticket, was validation enough to go shoot up an entire apartment complex in Chicago. I mean, how messed up is that? The history of America is a history of brutality. Happy Christmas, might I add. When it comes to my speech, I had to learn how to not stutter when I speak. I say and a lot, and that bugs people. But the two speech types that I practiced regularly, one of them was my favorite hero of the 20th century, and that was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His voice was mighty, he just didn't accomplish shit. He became the face of Black America, where rightly it should have been Malcolm X. That mantle should have rightly been placed on a Nebraska-born native. Malcolm X was born in Omaha, Nebraska. How many of y'all knew that? Why was Malcolm X marginally successful? Well, because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a firearm for protecting his family and used that firearm to protect his family. So even all his talk of peace, when it come to protecting his family, he was armed with the Second Amendment. I don't carry my Second Amendment. I'm armed with the First Amendment. If the First Amendment doesn't work, I'll scream louder. That comes to the second speech type that I practiced, and that's Adolf Hitler. When it come to screaming and getting people to listen, because he was screaming, yeah, he got a lot of people to listen, didn't he? He also said a lot of things that were very fucking true. He was able to slip his lies, his hatred, his propaganda in between the truth, sandwiched in between half-truths. But the things that he was saying about the British Empire and how it needed to be destroyed, and the things that he was saying about the French Empire, which, yes, it was an empire. You don't have to have a monarchy to be an empire. Even democratic nations can engage in imperial expansionism. Now, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he actually was able to achieve the destruction of empire that Adolf Hitler couldn't do through war. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was able to do that through commerce. He caught the British with their pants down in a desperate time of need. And the British were so afraid they were willing to give up almost anything just to keep their tiny little island. They were willing to sell out the Poles. The very reason that the British were in the war is because of Poland. Poland! They sold out the Polish. They had to give up all of their territories because that was the agreement. That was the agreement with Roosevelt for the assistance that they got. Thank goodness. I am absolutely against Adolf Hitler, but I'm also against what all of those nations stood for as well, which is the same exact thing. The anti-Semitism, the preying on the homeless. You want to advertise your soup kitchens, but you don't advertise what your police are doing to the people who go to those places, are you? Things we do to this day. Our model for the prison systems today is based off of forced labor camps and concentration camps. We saw how those things were run and managed and went, hey, wow, we could do that. And here in America, it's a capitalist society, so we figured out a way to make a profit off of the American public for doing such a thing. It's disgusting. It was gross when Hitler did it. It's gross when we do it. Who did Hitler go after? The weakest of society. The ones easiest to blame, the ones easiest to take it out on, the ones that people already had a bias against. All of Europe had a bias against Jews. All of it. It didn't matter where you went. It didn't matter if you were in Sweden. It didn't matter if you were in Switzerland or Denmark or Germany or France or Spain or Great Britain. People just straight up hated the Jews, and there was a whole bunch of Jew hating coming from Ireland. Whew! The part I want to focus on with Adolf Hitler being right, though, is the mass graves. The mass graves that were created by Stalin and his purges. The mass graves created by Lenin. You don't hear about those so much, do you? That's because Stalin overpowered that situation and took over through paranoia and seclusion. He got a lot of people killed. And that's one of the things that many in Germany kept on trying to get all of Europe to listen to. Hey, the Russians are killing mass quantities of people right at our fucking borders. Like, we can see them burying people. We got binoculars. We're watching them bury people. We're taking pictures of them burying mass quantities of civilians, their own civilians. They're doing it blatantly and openly. They have all of this vast territory, and they're too lazy to use that vast territory to get rid of these bodies. They're basically just going, all right, well, this is a village next to the German border. Anybody who is quasi-German speaking or multilingual, we'll kill them and put them in a mass grave. Great idea. No, it's not a great idea. Now, where do I get off talking about Hitler on Christmas? Well, because there's many people here in America who are being punished by a system that was created in Nazi Germany that has become the model for the United States and Great Britain today. Meanwhile, Australia is not far behind. The closest to a free nation that there is, as far as the English colonies, is New Zealand. Australia is not far behind Great Britain, and we shouldn't call it Great Britain anymore. It's just Britain. Their colonies are gone. India was tired of having their population massacred and put in mass graves. Over in Asia, people were tired of being wholesale slaughtered and put in mass graves. It didn't matter if you were a British owner or a French owner or an American owner. I mean, basically, we had the whole world enslaved under British and French rule. And Germany wanted a cut of the profits. I mean, that's the same shit in World War I. They wanted a cut of the profits from human trafficking, slavery, indentured servitude, the Roman rental system. And of course, we had executive business models from the United States, the first country to commercialize incarceration and desperation in such a way. The United States model is par excellence. It is the greatest model there is for human trafficking. Even the Nazi Germans couldn't do better. Even Imperial Britain couldn't do better. Even industrial Japan couldn't do better. No empire in its history has ever been greater at manipulating a populace or human trafficking than the United States and its capitalist society. 30,000 people were human trafficked through San Diego just last year alone, according to the city of San Diego. Yeah, pretty significant. If that's what they're admitting to, how many more are going through San Diego? I almost said San Francisco. Now, our model, it's not a genocidal model. That's why it's able to be used in the way that it is. Even the Romans Even their system of slavery is nothing compared to the American indentured servitude system. I mean, credit is... that's used to rip off every American, even if you've never had a credit card. I mean, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You have to take part in the system or they condemn you for it. You have to produce as an American. You have to produce money for the United States government. And if you won't produce money for them, they will lock you up and others will pay them. You don't have to be guilty of anything. But just in case somebody's watching, they'll make literally everything a crime. Just depends on which loophole you want to dive through and how much you want it. You're an officer, you got a badge. The person in front of you is driving you nuts because they're driving the speed limit. Well, you could find a reason to pull them over if you really just don't want to sit behind them. And officers say that stuff often. They also watch who they say it to. We figured out how to make a lot more money and a lot more stuff off of that slave labor. We also get to see that a happy population produces more and better goods. When people are in a happy place in their lives, which America is not okay with. Here in America, we are supposed to bow down to corporate tycoons like our government officials do. And, you know, with those government officials, yeah, they got access to underage boys and girls. Jeffrey Epstein was, well, you guys want to look at that as a tinfoil hat and conspiracy theory. It's Christmas. Look at your family. Look at your kids. Look at them right now and tell me that they're not worth fighting for. Because that is what has been at stake the entire time while you guys are looking away. How would you like it if somebody stole your daughter? How would you like hearing the news that your daughter had her brains blown out at Macintosh Dairy, December 29th of 2017? Imagine if that was your daughter, or your sister, or your friend. And she's not the only one. What about Selena Not Afraid? Her older brother Preston, killed by police. Her sister Teresa ran over at the airport, over in Billings. Her twin sister Zoe killed herself when she was 11 years old. Zoe Not Afraid. Youngest suicide in Montana history. We're not doing great things. We're not doing great things under Biden. We didn't do great things under Trump. We didn't do great things under Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. We didn't do great things under either of the Bush years. We forgot what the Second Amendment is for. The Second Amendment is not for scaring off black people. The Second Amendment is not for hunting. The Second Amendment isn't for killing your daughter's boyfriend. The Second Amendment is for defending ourselves against tyranny. All enemies, both foreign and domestic. How many of you took that oath? Who's the enemy? Is it who they tell you the enemy is? Well, our Constitution was dismantled in the United States, and they pointed you at other countries and said, go there. It's their fault your Constitution is gone. It's Iraq's fault that Americans won't fight for the Constitution here in America. How is that? How is that Iraq's fault? How is that Afghanistan's fault? And we want to make excuses. Oh, well, you know, those Muslims, they all cut up their daughter's genitalia at birth so they can never enjoy sex. Really? Are you sure about that? Also, not sure if you noticed, but we're in the United States of America. My genitalia were mutilated without my permission before I was 3 days old. And then I'm told, oh, well, you know, you should be glad that you had that happen because, see, here's the thing. It enhances a woman's sexual pleasure. Wait a second. Are you telling me that you mutilated an infant for a 40-year-old? You mutilated an infant baby boy because a 40-year-old woman who's super horny might like it more? Holy shit. That's fucking gross. That is gross on such another level. You know, I got Hebrew ancestors. I don't hate Jews, not even close. Now, there's a big difference between Israeli, Hebrew, and Jewish. Jewish is the religion. Israel is the nation. Hebrew is the bloodline. But really, it's not so much of a bloodline. They were lost for 2,000 years. Scattered across Europe for the most part. They didn't have their own land. 2,000 years of interbreeding with the locals. Well, thank goodness. We get to see with animals what happens when you got too much inbreeding. And that's what purebred means. It means that it's inbred, which is really gross. And you're going to end up with genetic issues with pretty much any animal that you're dealing with. What's called husbandry is the breeding process. Now, Adolf Hitler tried to do that with the Lebensborn program. He wasn't the first one to do it, though. I mean, even the British had programs to try to convince people to breed in a certain race or a certain color. Same thing with the French. Same thing with the Spanish. Now, here in America, when we think of the Spanish, we don't think European. We certainly don't think Northern European. We don't think of people that look like Vikings being in Spain, being of Spanish origin, having dozens of generations going back that they can show you their lineage living in Spain. And you don't think, well, you know, here in America, when we think Spanish, we assume Mexican. And when we assume Mexican, we basically think anybody who's brown. They could be Native American. They could be Puerto Rican. They could be from just about anywhere. 1950s, we got to use that program. A lot of them old Army buses. And this is one of the horrible things about Nebraska history. My grandma had a friend, and she went to school, I want to say, in Big Springs. But she had a friend of hers that she went to school with that was abducted by one of these buses. And, see, Nebraska was former Spanish territory. The Spanish laid claim to it, and there was a lot of Spanish people in the area before America took it. So there was a lot of Spanish people in the area already. And there was a lot of Native Americans in the area, and a lot of those people had intermingled with the Native Americans. So, for a lot of us, when we think Spanish, we think, because the Mexicans speak in the Spanish language, we think of Spanish people as brown eyed, brown hair, brown skin. My last name, Schwartz, it means black, but it's very specifically black eyes, black hair, black skin. Obviously, that's not what I look like, is it? I've got brown eyes, I've got brown hair part of the year, and quasi-blonde part of the year. My beard's pretty much always scruff-colored. We got all this stuff going on, and you guys are going to enjoy your holiday meals with your families, your friends. You get to go do fun things. You're not constantly forced from place to place to place to place. The inhumanity that I've had to deal with for the entirety of my life because of you guys and your assumptions of who is a more or lesser person, who is an Untermenschen, as the Germans would have called them, lesser people. I get that your bias tells you that I'm less of a person. Because of the color of my skin, I am to blame for everything that is wrong in this world, according to much of the United States population. Because of my gender, I must earn more money than women. I must be stronger than women. I must be all sorts of bias. The same kind of bias that Hitler preyed on. The same kind of bias that Winston Churchill preyed on. What Hitler did was completely wrong. It was also wrong of Stalin. It was wrong of Britain. It was wrong of France. France didn't stop, and neither did Britain. After World War II, both of those thought they were going to try to get their empires back, but not without American backing, and America wasn't going to give that easily. We didn't do shit in Vietnam until the French were already fucking ass-kicked and out of there. We watched their empires crumble. And rightly so. We've got many free and independent nations today, like India. These nations we like to look down upon, and we like to say, oh, well, they don't have as much as we do. Well, look at what the British gave them. Look at what the British allowed them. Look at what the British took from them. The British made slavery illegal just on the British Isle. But all of their colonies were slave colonies, every single one of them. All of those colonies were set up for basic natural resources, which means, sure, you can pull out 30,000 tons of clay in 6 months by manual labor and put them on these transports to go to Great Britain. When you get to Great Britain, that's where you have all of the money and the infrastructure. That's where you have all of the manufacturing, the kilns, the smelters, the ironworks, the shipbuilding. All you're doing in colonies is raping them of their natural resources, and Britain basically had to because the British were shitty with resource conservation. The mighty English oak isn't even an English native tree. Those groves had to be planted there so that those mighty ships could be built. Now, there was a native oak that was native to England, and we've got dugout canoes and log canoes and all sorts of other things that are, 15 to 20,000 years old or older. And we can find that stuff that's made out of the old type of English oak. But it doesn't exist anymore. It's extinct. It's not there. Adolf Hitler was a fucked up person. Now you get to see the difference between the life that Adolf Hitler lived, the life that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lived. People listened to both of those men. But it was the use of that Second Amendment that was the ultimate decider in which tyrant won. Everybody's tyrant, or figureheads, are going to tell you the propaganda they want you to hear. The stuff that they can utilize to try to get you on their side. Now, many things that the Germans told us about Russia, not just us. I mean, the Germans told the whole world what Russia was doing at their borders. They tried to anyway. And that's not an Adolf Hitler thing. That was actual people in Germany actively protesting the fact that the world was not looking at the genocide right across their border. Now, I want to encourage you guys, first of all, to read 2 books for me. Whether you're a Christian or not, I want you to read the Bible. Instead of reading it with a context of what your preacher's been telling you what it says, instead of the cliff notes at the bottom that tell you your denomination's particular explanation or reinterpretation, I want you just to read the book as if you were a kid interested in a story. It's a far different book, I assure you. I also encourage you to read Mein Kampf. Now, there's a reason for reading these 2 books. There are many people in your life who are going to use religion as an excuse to harm you. Here in America, the primary religion that you're going to have to deal with that from, well, that's the same religion that follows the Bible. So it is important for you to know what it actually says. When they try to use something out of context, you throw it in their face that they're using it out of context. For everything that is said in the Bible, there is a loophole in the Bible somewhere. Just like American law, just like German law, just like Nazi law, just like British law. There's always loopholes. And why do they have those? Public opinion. The Greeks had it right from the start. Public opinion. All of our laws have to have loopholes, just in case the public does not want to, well, let's say just in case the public hates somebody a whole lot. And it gets out of hand how much they hate that person. And doing the lawful thing would allow that person to go free. But everybody hates them. So, really, you want to save your reputation, or in some cases, you want to save your head, literally. You let them have their sacrifice. We have time and time again, not just in the Old West, but even in the last 20 years, had local law enforcement hand over innocent people to groups of people that killed them. I mean, law enforcement officers giving a 14-year-old boy who is bleeding, who is naked, bleeding from the genitalia and bleeding from the head, they gave him to a man who was already a registered sex offender by the name of Jeffrey Dahmer, while there were 2 women there who knew the 14-year-old boy, who were telling the cops what was going on. And what did those cops do? They threatened to arrest those 2 women. And those 2 women let it go. And Jeffrey Dahmer killed that 14-year-old boy and ate that 14-year-old boy. And 20 years later, the officers who gave that underage 14-year-old boy to that pedophile and threatened to arrest those two women got to retire with full pensions. I hope that someday humans become less self-centered and more understanding enough that the First Amendment is enough. But until that day comes, we have the Second Amendment. That is our Pandora's box, that is our equalizer, and you can see that the most armed of our population are the most protected and least likely to be armed are the most victimized. Happy Christmas. Try not to be by a rapist or raped by a mass shooter. Try not to be taken hostage in a Walmart by somebody who breaks your stereotypes. And try understanding that just because something is true doesn't make it true for every situation. And just because somebody says something prolific and honest doesn't mean that they have good intentions. And it doesn't mean that everything that comes out of their mouth is the truth. Good to be rid of you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper. And no victim left behind, no matter what bias you hold.